Afternoon. Nathan Arnold, who is visiting us from his home in South Carolina, holds a BA in church music and an MA in sacred composition. An accomplished poet and writer of song texts, he's published over 70 musical works with various publishers. Nathan teaches on the high school and university levels, is active in the music ministry of his church, and directs Distinctive Music Studios and BetterLessons.com. He also has an online music instruction service for homeschoolers. Please welcome with me our speaker, Nathan Arnold.
Good afternoon. It's a real pleasure to be here with you this week. I've enjoyed meeting many of you and having the chance to discover other Christians and other brothers and sisters in Christ who have the same kind of beliefs and dedication to educating their children. I myself was one of the first generation homeschoolers. When I started homeschooling, or my parents started homeschooling me, there were very few others. I didn't really know anyone else who homeschooled. But looking back on that, I appreciate very much their dedication and see the ways in which their sacrifice contributed in a way that I hope that someday to contribute to my own children. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, and Tom mentioned a little bit when we first started, I direct a music studio in Greenville, South Carolina. We have over 150 students in our physical studio. We also have a service that we started a couple years ago of online video instruction, and this is actually a two-way live video instruction. So we see students on a screen and they see us, we talk to them, they talk back, and it's just like a live lesson, except it allows us to give a very high level of quality teaching of Christian teachers in the home, in places where teachers aren't available. And we offer lessons in piano, and violin, and classical guitar, French horn, flute, and offering other instruments coming up. And this has been really exciting for us and been something that has really given us the opportunity to have a window and input into ministries around the world, literally. We have students in Australia and Germany, Wisconsin, and Georgia. And in the course of a week, I teach to all those places. The Australia time zones are kind of interesting sometimes, but the Lord has really used it, and we're really happy about that. One of the things that you begin to discover when you teach a lot of students is that every student is different. And I'm not telling you anything that you don't know. In a family, out of 4 siblings, certain ones will have certain strengths, others will have certain weaknesses. One student may be a very quick reader, another one be a little bit slower at their sight reading. But the one who's slower at their sight reading might have a much stronger musical sense. When they learn a piece, it's very beautifully phrased, it has focus to it and communication abilities, where the other has to really work at that. And that's just part of the wonder of how God has made us and how He has made each individual person, given them specific gifts and talents that allow them to be effective in their ministry for Him. And in working with these students, you also get to know the parents very well and discover very quickly that, I shouldn't say discover because I grew up in a family taking music lessons, but you're reminded very quickly that not all the difficulties are always on the student side of things. Yes, there are practice difficulties and things that students have to go through, but there are significant issues on the parent side of things. There are motivational issues and financial issues and lots of different challenges. And we always say with our studio that our goal is not only to grow good students, but also to grow good parents. And we don't mean that in a belittling sense of that we're trying to teach our parents things, but simply to encourage and be a moral support, kind of an uplifting encouragement to the parents that are taking lessons. We understand and we feel very strongly the need to have that kind of backing and that kind of moral support when you're the one who's actually having to make the lessons happen. Just starting out here today, and this is something that I don't think will be picked up on the tape, but I would just be interested to get some feedback from you. And just from the audience, many of you, in fact, let me just ask how many of you have students or children that are students of piano or taking music lessons, if you could raise your hand. Okay. Wow, almost everyone out there, just getting some feedback of what are some things that parents face with piano lessons? Practice, okay, I heard that. So did everyone else in the room. We all hear that. Very good. Can't read music, okay, good. Okay, all right, headache. Boy, that flute is just a little too loud. Yeah, all right. Okay, good. Spending the practice time working on the songs that are assigned and not endless renditions of Heart and Soul. We joke with our students that I tell the parents that I think they come out of the womb playing Heart and Soul. Nobody ever teaches it to them. They just all know it. All right. But yes, okay, focusing and learning how to have a good practice session, not just one that's idle repetition of something, okay? And these challenges, what you'll notice as these challenges are being voiced is that for almost every one of these, I'm up here, you can see it yourself, the problem is given, and instantly every head in the room is nodding, okay? Because these are things that everyone faces. These are not just things that are unique or something that only happens in your household. And we find this with all of our students, again, that there are challenges that are common to learning an instrument. And the first step, as with any problem, in solving these challenges or dealing with them is understanding them, is knowing what the problem is, what's behind it, what is the root of the problem, which then allows the problem to be dealt with and to be solved. First of all, just in getting started, some benefits of studying music. And these are things that are just helpful to rehearse and even for parents to understand as they're talking with their children. Let me say something before I continue with this, that I would like to, time permitting, to have a portion of time at the end of the session in which we can have some questions and answers. So as we're going through the session, we deal with a lot of different instruments and situations. Our studio, I've been teaching for over 13 years. Our studio has been in business for about 6 or 7 years. We have multiple instruments, so if there are some things, I would like for this to be something that is tailored for you and that's helpful, and I would be glad at the end of the session if there are any things that some insight can be lended to that we'd love to do that. So you can keep that in mind. And let me say one other note about the things that we're talking about. There will be many things in this session that many of you will have already heard before or perhaps already be practicing. That's all right. And with a session like this, what I have found is that it's not everything in the session. It's that one thing. It's that one help or that one hint that can be the lifesaver, and going home from this convention, be the one thing that perhaps helps your student avoid being another music lesson dropout and actually helping them succeed and continue with their study. The personal satisfaction of being able to play an instrument. And this is something that is a learned skill. There are certain skills that sociologists talk about being filed away. When you learn to ride a bicycle, you may spend, a child may spend a long time learning, or several weeks, and be quite a struggle. They fall down and so forth. But once they've learned. And, they may be in a situation where for 20 years they don't ride a bicycle again. But you know what? Put them on a bike in 20 years and they could do it just as well. And that's because that action and that skill is actually something that is filed away. It's a skill that's with them the rest of their life. Same thing is true with an instrument. And when a child has learned or attained a certain level of proficiency on an instrument, the rest of their life they're going to have that skill. And that is something that carries with it a personal testimony of attainment and dedication. When they are 40 years old and they can sit down in their living room and play hymns for their family devotions, that's going to be a level of satisfaction. That is a gift. That is a skill that they have attained when they were young, and something that's really important consideration in studying music. The development of music reading skills and music appreciation, being able to read music so that you can sing in a church choir, being able to read the parts so that when you're in that male quartet, that you can take your part home and pick it out on the piano, or help your kids with piano and sit with them next to their piece and point out the note that they're missing and why that's a C sharp and not a C natural, and being able to just have at least a basic understanding of the vocabulary of music, and with music appreciation. With music appreciation, basically what we mean is the ability to understand how music is put together and what the background is. I tell my students a story about a radio broadcast that I was listening to in the car one day. And some of you may remember the crash of one of the Concorde supersonic planes, and I believe this was basically the incident that ended its flying tradition or its flying career. And on the morning of that crash happening, I was listening to a radio broadcast, a very well-done news broadcast, and the nickname for this airplane was the Swan. And the reason why was because the nose of the plane would hinge down almost like a swan's neck. And it was considered to be a very beautiful plane and a well-designed plane. And when this plane had crashed, it was pretty well recognized that this was probably the end of this flight of this plane, of any of the models. And in the news broadcast, I remember that the newscaster gave kind of an elegy to the significance of this plane and how it had changed so many, broken so many barriers and changed so many thought processes. And the closing music for the broadcast was Saint-Saëns, the Swan, okay? Beautiful number on the cello. And no explanation of that number. And sitting there listening to that broadcast, there was an extra level of appreciation and beauty that was gained from the knowledge of that piece. That was a specifically chosen piece. A person who had never had any acquaintance with music history or any kind of classical music, and some of you may say, well, I wouldn't have known that was the Swan, okay? But just as an illustration of how a little bit of understanding about a piece or about a song or a composer can greatly expand not just the richness of listening to that piece, but the richness of life. Music is all around us. It's something that you will encounter. If you don't encounter it in your own study or your own performance, you're going to encounter it on recordings, in the grocery store, on the radio, in a film with a film score, and understanding how that music is put together and how it's constructed, and your child understanding that is something for the rest of their life is going to add to their enjoyment of it. Encouragement of focus and long-term commitment. One of the things that I think is really important to understand with music lessons is that some of the most important lessons that are learned are not musical ones. They are personal ones. They are the lessons of diligence, of perseverance, of investment, of time dedicated to pursuing a certain skill. Time spent playing a video game or playing outside in the woods or playing soccer with the neighbor's children. While that may be enjoyable, at the same time, there's nothing to show for it. Learning an instrument is like investing money in the bank. It's like putting something away that doesn't show initial results. You're putting it in, you're not getting anything back, but when it comes time to go to college or it comes time to buy that first car, the money's there. And the ability to do something is there that would not be there had the saving not been done. The same thing is true with a time investment of an instrument. Taking that time, investing it in something, putting it into a certain skill, eventually bears fruit. And the lesson of that, the personal experience of seeing that investment bear fruit is invaluable to a child. It's something that for the rest of their life will impact not just their music, but the way that they approach anything, the way that they approach a task, and being willing to be patient, to pour something in to a fund that has no results, whether it be doing right, whether it be being faithful to their family, that shows no apparent benefit at the moment, yet they will see that there is something that will be gained in the end and something that's worth accomplishing. Some challenges of studying music. First of all, practice challenges. Ooh, we had to get to that, didn't we? Okay. First of all, realizing that like other educational pursuits, practice will not always be enjoyable or fun. Okay, and I think this is a really important thing for parents to understand. There's kind of a concept that I encounter from time to time with parents that say, well, you know, my child, I was forcing them to do lessons. You know, I was making them do it, and they weren't doing it on their own, and so we just quit. Okay? Well, of course, we all want things to be enjoyable, and we want things to be interesting and for children to enjoy them, and there's a balance there. But on the other hand, there is a certain level of diligence and decision-making that children at certain ages are not always capable of. There were points in my music training, I'll tell you very clearly, in which I did not want to keep taking lessons. Okay? I would have quit in a second. But I'm glad my mom didn't let me. Okay? And even though I wasn't enjoying them at the moment, looking back, I realized that her testimony to me that this was the right thing to do was something that in the end I look back on and appreciated. The dynamic here doesn't have to be one of cruelty or forcing or you will do this. I was joking to one of my folks at my booth today. They asked, how do you encourage your kids to practice. And I said, oh, we have a catalog of bullwhips back here in the back, a wide assortment for your use, okay? It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be a forced thing. It can be something that is a simple, loving relationship challenge of sitting down with a child and explaining, you may not understand why you're doing this, but you're going to have to trust me, okay? This is something that will be valuable to you in the future. It's something that you will appreciate someday, and this is something we're going to keep doing. Scheduling practice time, okay? Prescribed amount of time, and this doesn't have to be necessarily something that's 7 days a week. You have church on Sunday. You may have, at least in every week, one day that is just an impossible day. Maybe it's prayer meeting nights. Maybe it's a certain day when there's soccer and baseball and, karate and a million other things, and there's just no way to get it in with school. But scheduling, what I encourage students to do is try to schedule 5 days, at least 5 days a week. And that kind of helps to set a realistic goal, not one that's impossible or always being violated or the student's always failing at, but something that's realistic, able to be accomplished, able to be achieved. Establishing a consistent time of day for practice, just like anything else, and this is actually something that is much easier to do in situations of most of the people in this room, which is home education, is scheduling your practice into your daily routine. Find a time of the day that can consistently work for practice. It may be first thing in the morning. It may be before supper. It may be after supper. It may be right after lunch. But that time is the sacred time. Every day at that time, practice happens. And getting in a routine like that for any child with any study is something that is really helpful in establishing a pattern and making something that doesn't have to be cajoled or argued about, but something that just happens. And that's helpful in a sense of regularity and also helpful in a sense of accomplishment. I just put on here, and making practice a non-negotiable, I just put on here a sample practice schedule. And this is something that you can consider making and putting together for your children yourself. There are practice books out that have something similar to this, but just a simple schedule like this that can actually have on the days of the week, for example, week 1 of the month, and maybe having the dates up there, of the 6th through the 11th, and every week across the month having those dates, and then on each day of the week, the 5 days, putting the amount of practice that goes through. And this is something that can really help a student to keep track of their time and to visually see where they have attained or have not attained practice. If they have 30 minutes, say, for example, on each day of the week, but on day 4, didn't quite get in enough time, they can see that and they can visually observe that that day was one in which they did not succeed. Many times what happens with students who are struggling with a consistent schedule is that they'll get in a little time each day, but not much. And so you're looking at their schedule as a parent, and it says 10 minutes, and 20 minutes, and 5 minutes, and 10 minutes, and 5 minutes, and 15 minutes. And, okay, well, it looks pretty good because they got something on every day, but then, you start adding that up, and it all totals up to less than an hour, and that's not really that much. And big surprise, they didn't pass any songs that week. What do you know? And that can be, for a student, something that's really visible. Even students lose track. They think, well, I did pretty good this week. I practiced every day. Yeah, you practiced for 5 minutes every day, and seeing that practice paid off or did not pay off in their lessons, again, is a visual example to them, an illustration to them of the direct correlation and connection between practice and progress. Some other challenges of studying music, practice challenges, being willing to establish rewards, both positive and negative, for practice consistency. And we do this very often, perhaps with a negative side of, well, you're going to do this, or you're grounded, you're going to be disciplined. If we don't get our practice in for this week, you're not going to be, you're going to be off the computer for a week if we don't start doing better with our practice. But I encourage parents to not only have negative words, but also to have positive ones. With young children especially, this can work wonders. I've had parents who have had certain systems where if students passed all of their songs, they got to get a 79-cent ice cream cone at Dairy Queen or McDonald's, okay? You wouldn't believe how they will work to get that 79-cent ice cream cone. In fact, one of our students, parents that was doing that, and in one of the lessons I asked them, so are you getting an ice cream cone today? You did real well. No, because she said that we could save up our 79 cents over 4 weeks and get a Big Mac. So that's what we're saving for. Oh, this is a big deal, they're going to get the Big Mac. And boy, a Big Mac never tasted so good. We accomplished this, we finished it. This is achieving a certain level of satisfaction and accomplishment. And that is a lesson, again, that's learned. A visual and small illustration of the long-term reward illustrated by a small reward that parallels that. Just real quickly, going back on the previous slide, there was a point that talked about making practice a non-negotiable, and this isn't on the screen, but I'd like to just talk about that for a moment. One of the things that really is, I wouldn't say sad to me, but I'm sad to hear from a parent's sake, is sometimes when parents will tell me that they really, that there's a lot of angst over piano and a lot of crying and upset about not going to lessons and practice and so forth. And I understand how that is. There were moments like that when I was younger as well. But what I really encourage parents that sometimes helps with this is with children to make practice a non-negotiable, to take something that the child maybe considers to be on the table, like taking lessons or practicing. If that is on the table, if it's something that's an option that might happen or might not, well, then you're going to have a lot of trouble with it because they're going to be trying to talk you out of doing it, okay? But if it's something that we just do, we've decided we're going to do this, we've talked about it, it's a spiritual decision, it's something, a matter of stewardship, of taking our gifts and developing for Christ's glory, for bettering ourselves and learning how to discipline ourselves toward things that really matter and are lasting in life, and we're going to do this, okay? That a lot of times takes care of a lot of the problems. Again, it doesn't have to be a cruel, harsh, dictarian kind of a decision, but it can be something that's just a simple, firm, and clear decision on a parent's part to help their children make the right priorities and encourage them to really pursue things that matter and things that are going to last in the future. Confirming practice efficiency, practicing of assigned songs for a proportioned amount of times. Okay? There's a saying that practice doesn't make perfect, it's perfect practice that makes perfect. Well, that's a little bit limited. I don't know if I would go quite that far, but it is true that the time spent in practice is only a small part of the picture. It's the quality of that time. It's what's accomplished during that time. It's the efficiency of the work that's taking place as students are practicing. And as a parent, you can have a very direct part in that. One of the difficulties that I will tell you from a teacher's standpoint is that we assign songs, and the songs go home, and they come back, and it's very obvious to us that one song got practiced for 25 minutes every day, and all the other 6 songs got practiced for a total of 5 minutes, which comes out to less than a minute per song. Okay, well, I'm maybe exaggerating a little bit, but similar situations to that. That's something that you can really help a teacher with. Find out what their assignment is for that week. Find out that they have that one song that they've been on for 10 weeks, okay, and they really need to get rid of the song, and they're really not practicing it. Communicate with the teacher. Find that out, and when you're at home, help enforce that in the practice time. When you're in the other room, making supper and hearing the practice, and you haven't heard that hymn, Terry, we've got to hear that hymn. Don't forget, Mrs. Allison said we've got to practice that hymn. You're reminding and just helping a student to pursue that will really be helpful in accomplishing and making progress as they need to. Encouraging careful practice, obviously not racing tempos or careless mistakes. And there are certain ages that this tends to happen at more than others. Junior high and thereabouts, students want to really play a fast piece that sounds impressive, and I'm growing up and I can do anything, superhuman student. But unfortunately, the piece suffers for that, encouraging them to really get mistakes fixed, to get them right, to be careful in how they practice, just like they should be in life and in other activities. And reinforcing prescribed practice techniques. Just examples of these would be note flashcards or metronome practice. We have with a lot of our students a exercise that we do with note reading that involves note flashcards. And there are different ways of doing this, but these cards that we use have a staff, a grand staff on each card of a treble clef and bass clef, and then a certain note. And as we hold up the card, the student plays the note on the keyboard. And we even initially work and focus even more on having them identify that note on the keyboard with a note on the staff, even in addition to or beyond the letter name. when you have identified the letter name of the note, you've only have part of the picture, because just the fact that that's a G doesn't tell you whether it's a low G or middle G or a high G. There are 4 different Gs that could be on the staff or nearby the staff. Actually playing the key on the piano really focuses specifically on exactly which G it is and what note it is. Things like that. And when a teacher has a certain method that they have designed for your student to help them achieve the goals they have, listen to that. Help with that. The more successful and more coordinated that you can be with that teacher, the more effective and more quickly your student is going to progress and make good progress. Okay? And metronome practice and so forth, depending on the student, depending on the piece, try to follow what the teachers have said. Some motivational challenges, okay, moving beyond the practice challenges a little bit. Discouraging complaining attitudes. Again, a lot of times the issues that are there with practicing and with music are not necessarily music ones. Okay? They are ones that are personal. They are issues of diligence, of looking at a task that has been given, even if it's an unpleasant one that's not desirable, and treating that task as an obligation that the Lord has given. How many things in life, looking back as parents, looking now at parents in life, are things that aren't fun? You know, dads don't always want to get up for work in the morning, all right? But, you know, somebody's got to do it. Moms don't always want to clean out those dirty toilets, but somebody's got to do it. And the right attitude is not one of self-pity or concern or self-absorption to the point of I'm being mistreated and everything is bad for me and I'm so unfortunate, but simply taking a task as something the Lord has given, whether it's desirable or not, and accepting it as a responsibility, as a way to prove a love for God, to show scripturally that when God has given this to you, this task to do, that He has given you not something that is a disappointing challenge, but something that is a wonderful opportunity to show how much you love Him. There's something that our pastor says regularly, that the test of authority is when you don't agree. When you're dealing with an authority figure or when you're under an authority figure and they're telling you things that you want to do anyway, that's pretty easy. I mean, what's different about that? You would do it anyway if they weren't there. The real test is when the authority tells you to do something that you don't want to do. And the same thing is true with the Lord. When the Lord gives us something that is difficult or is a challenge, the test isn't the easy thing. The test is the hard thing. And that's something that even at a young age that students can learn, that they can observe, and that they can gain a victory over that will, again, impact them in other ways, in other areas of their life. Expecting momentary changes of interest. Again, at certain ages, there are going to be lapses in judgment or small moments in which the same fervor that was there at the beginning of lessons dissipates. When we first started, they were so excited, and now 6 months later, they're not. Well, you know, talk to some other parents. It happens. Happened with me, happened with my brothers, happens with most of my students, if not all of them, and that's just something, again, to deal with. You're dealing not necessarily with a certain direction with a student in all cases, but in many times simply a maturing process, and something that at that age they are maybe not in a position to really make an educated, strong decision or informed decision of what they're doing, and you can help with that, again, as a parent, and encouraging that. Encourage success. Okay, again, this is not all negative. Support things that are accomplished. Compliment voluntary performances of favorite songs. When grandparents come or friends come over for dinner, announce after dinner, we are going to have a little concert in the living room before we have devotions or a challenge. Clarence is going to play his sacred piece for us. Okay, and everyone sits down. Clarence gets up. He plays, I don't know, is anybody named Clarence anymore? Maybe that's a dated name. I have a student named Clarence. Anyway, Clarence gets up there, he plays his piece, everyone listens to it, they're blessed by it if it's a sacred piece. They say amen, the grandparents maybe applaud, and that's something that really is rewarding to a child. It's a small thing, it may seem something insignificant, it may take 5 minutes of your time, but that can be something that encourages a student to the point of perhaps even being something that keeps them doing lessons, that shows them, again, a small in a small way, the long-term results that will come from their study and the reward of their diligence. Involve yourself as much as possible. I would encourage our parents not to be sideline parents, to let us do everything and, all right, want you to motivate my child and get them to do what they need to do, and we're sending them home and they come back and it's obvious that nobody was involved with them at home. The more that you can be involved, the better. And again, we'll talk about in a moment, there's a certain proper level of involvement, but at the same sense, for the most part, most teachers that you speak to will very much encourage this kind of involvement because we don't know what goes on at home. We send a student home, we have them for 30 minutes out of the week. They go home and they practice maybe 45 minutes a day, depending on their level, 30 minutes a day. They're at home for at least 5 times or 6 times at the piano more than they are in lessons. So we only see them for a small percentage of their time through the week. And during that time is when the real progress happens. You are the only stabilizer in that practice time. We hopefully, in their own maturity, that eventually that changes, but you can be a real stabilizing force. We'll put it that way. You can be someone who really serves as an encouragement and a positive influence as they're working through these things at home. Some tips for parents of children studying music, okay? Understand varying levels of progress. Every student is different. We many times have situations in families where we have a younger student that progresses more quickly than an older student. And that happens. Not surprising. You know just from each of your children and just various issues and skills that they have that everyone's different. There's nothing that is wrong with that, and not even necessarily a reaction that should be that one student is talented and one student isn't. Different students progress at different times. We've had, in the same instance, some of those students that moved slowly through a certain part of music and then later on really picked up speed and almost passed their older, their younger sibling. The important thing, again, is to encourage students that they are not responsible for anyone else's talent. They are only responsible for their own. God has given them certain gifts, and the important issue that is on the table for them is their stewardship of those gifts. Whether or not they take those gifts that God has given them and have used them, or whether they have buried them in the ground and delivered them back to God exactly as He gave them to them to begin with. And with these students, understanding that from a parental standpoint can be helpful in helping your child to understand that. We will oftentimes, with students that are going through that struggle, an older student that's being passed by a younger sibling, move the older student into a different method or a different piano course just to remove that distraction. Not even though we would perhaps rather have them in that better piano course, the more important aspect at that point for us is removing that hindrance from them, of kind of removing the comparison process where this is a race and he's winning and I'm losing, but making it something that is simply about their personal progress and doing the best that they can. And that's how the Lord looks at it, that's how we should look at it, and that's how we should encourage the student to look at it in the same way. Directing questions to a teacher regarding a student's progress, but I would encourage the willingness to support that teacher concerning the best method for progress. And this is really tough sometimes, and this is kind of the other side of the coin with being involved with students. I know personally that, there's if you want something done, you got to do it yourself, and I know how that is. I tend to be the same way with things. On the other hand, there is a certain amount of expertise that exists with a teacher, and that is why we hire teachers, right? That's the reason why that you ask that teacher to teach your child. If you had that expertise yourself, then you would have taught them yourself. And the right kind of attitude many times, or the right kind of support that a parent can give, is one that is very encouraging of a teacher and not necessarily never asking questions or wanting to understand what's happening with a student, but at the same time not insisting that a teacher change their method, or I don't understand why we're doing such and such. So-and-so's teacher is doing something else, okay? Well, from a teaching standpoint, again, a teacher looks at that and says, okay, well, why don't you just go ahead and take over, you seem to understand this, better than I do, and the teacher wouldn't say that, but at the same time, it can be discouraging to a teacher. If there comes a point where you feel like that there needs to be a change in teachers, or there needs to be a different approach, that's something that can be handled in a very tactful and careful way. But encourage the teachers, support them, and when they have given a method or an approach, be willing to try that. Take that method home even if you don't understand it, and try it with the students. You might be surprised. There might be some really strange teaching methods that actually work. And that's actually, when you start talking to people, that's kind of what all the teachers use. And boy, I didn't realize that. It seems weird, but I guess that's what they do. And that's kind of the nature of different studies and specific studies. Different procedural decisions that are often difficult ones would be decisions regarding literature selection. And I just wish that we could do this certain piece, this piece that they just love, or my grandmother played this, and boy, I would really love for Clarence to play this piece because it's my grandmother's favorite. Well, the teacher says Clarence isn't quite ready for that piece. In fact, they're not even close to ready. They're about 3 books away from learning that piece. Well, that's something that should be taken, seriously. The student who's pouring their time into something that's beyond their level can actually be doing damage to themselves, not necessarily physically, although that's possible, but even in ways of just learning bad habits. If a teacher's looking at that student and saying, there is no way on this earth that they're going to accomplish that piece, then the end result is only going to be a very sloppy, half-learned, half-baked rendition of it, and that teaches the student things that are not helpful. Older students' transitions into repertoire pieces requiring longer learning cycles. This is something that's a little bit difficult when children or students first begin learning music. They are initially moving very quickly through pieces. In a piano book, they might have 4 or 5 pieces in a week. They're passing them, they're moving through. They've just passed one whole book in 2 months, and then the next book in 3 months, and so forth. But then by the 4th book, they're on it for 9 months, and then they're on it for 12 months, and then they've got that one Chopin etude that they're on for a year, and wow, it seems like we're slowing down here. We're making such good progress, and what's happening? Well, what's important to understand, and this is different with different instruments, but especially with piano, the nature of piano is so reading intensive that as songs get more difficult, the learning cycles, we call them, inevitably slow down. And this is something that happens with any student. If you go to a conservatory in Boston or any other conservatory and go into their piano department and talk to some of the students there, and they're learning pieces, and you say, how long have you been working on this piece? Oh no, this piece isn't for next week. This is a year from now, my recital, and I just got the piece. A year from now? Yeah, that's when we start on them. We start a year because the piece is so difficult that perfecting it takes that amount of time. Your students may not quite be up to that level of a repertoire or a college piece, but at the same time, it's important to understand that the learning cycles will slow down as pieces get more difficult. It's going to take more time to learn that hard piece, and more importantly, to perfect it, not just to get it in a way that's a check mark, I finished that piece, got all the notes, got all the rhythms, but one that really learns the nuances, that learns the details and the fine points of artistry and skill. And that's something that is not a characteristic of a poor teacher, it's a characteristic of a good teacher who's being very careful in teaching your student the right habits and the right methods for learning a piece. Recommendations regarding performance opportunities or value evaluations. And this can go, again, on both sides of things. There's, of course, an appropriate caution and carefulness in regards to students not becoming puffed up or proud about their talents and skills and so forth. But at the same time, there are performance opportunities that can really motivate and encourage students to attain towards a higher level. Many times, I kind of almost, I wouldn't say laugh, but I kind of think to myself when someone says to me, well, I don't want my children to be in a performance because I don't want them to get proud. And I think to myself, I think the most humiliating experiences I've ever had were performances. I don't know, the proud thing just doesn't seem playing in a group with 20 kids, and I wasn't the best one. There were 10 kids that were better than me. Well, it's a pretty good thing. Going and playing in a rating or contest against other performers, and you go and you not only don't place, you don't even make finals. Well, the effect that has is generally for a student, not necessarily, I've found, interestingly enough, usually it's not a discouraging thing, it's a challenging thing. A lot of students, they think, wow, those guys are good. I want to be like those guys. I want to practice and compare myself to what they play and to figure out, apples, oranges, what's the difference here? What can I do to my music to make it attain the level of their music and to actually achieve the same level of expertise that they did? Remember that teachers, again, have undergone years of training and trained hundreds of students like your children. That's what you pay them for. Of course, different teachers have different levels of training, but when it's a very different perspective oftentimes from a teacher's standpoint. You see your student coming to lessons half hour a week, coming back the next week. A piano teacher sits there, and they see student after student after student after student, after year after year after year. And the thing that they're seeing in your student, in your child, the problem that they're telling you how to fix with a certain method is not just something they pulled out of their hat. They've tried this 100 times, and it works, and they've seen it with other students. And take that. There's some experience there, and there's a level of accomplishment that is benefiting your child. It's something that's actually to be encouraged. It's something that is a gift that you can take advantage of. Older students who have gone before are living, playing success stories. Going to a recital or to a contest and hearing older, more advanced students who play very difficult pieces and pieces that are notable in their technique. That's something that really, again, is challenging to a young student. Interestingly, and I used to kind of worry in our recitals that even I had some older beginners, and I would think, I don't know if I even want to come to the recital because they're going to be so discouraged because, a younger student is playing a piece that's so much harder than them. Very rarely the case, okay? Usually they get up there, play their piece, they're kind of proud of what they've accomplished, and when they see those other kids play, they understand, okay, I got started a little later, and that's actually a challenge to them. They think, if they can do it, I can do it too. If that 10-year-old can play for Elise, then surely with a couple years I can get to that point. And that's something that can again motivate and be an encouragement that helps make progress. I think I have one other section of the presentation here, but I think before we go to that, I would just like to give an opportunity for questions. I think this last portion is something that is not necessarily is somewhat optional, and if we go into that, I don't think we'll have time for anything. I should ask if there are any questions from the audience or things that parents would have regarding their students. Mm-hmm. I think I understand the question. Okay, so the question, I'll repeat it back and tell me if I'm getting it correct, and I think the tape, I'll repeat it for the tape anyway. So the question was that there was kind of a rough experience with piano from a parent's standpoint as a child, and there's a fear of communicating that, I guess, to her children as she helps them with piano. I guess there are different situations with every student and every parent. What I would encourage is that parents don't need to feel perfect when they're helping their children with piano. You know what? You're going to sit down to help your student, and there's going to get to a spot in the music where you say, no, that means you stop at that point. That's a place where the music stops, and then you keep going. And they're going to get to lessons, and they're going to ask the teacher, and the teacher says, oh, no, that actually means that you keep moving along. And they're going to come home and say, you know what, Mom? You said that I stopped there, and it didn't. You got it wrong, okay? And that's kind of humiliating. It's embarrassing a little bit from a parent's standpoint. I understand that. But what I would also say is don't let that little thing discourage you from being a help to your students. You may have had a rough experience in the past, or you may have had a very poor or low level of training when you were young. That doesn't mean that you can't help your child. You can be a moral encouragement and support. What I would encourage, if that's really something like that's an issue, is perhaps to sit in on your child's lessons. Listen to what the teacher says, straight from the horse's mouth. No, I heard, Mrs. Gray say that. She said that to you in your lesson, and I heard it with my own ears, and that's what you're going to do. And that could be something that's a direct connection so that the student isn't working you against the teacher. But, you can still be a real impact no matter what your limitations have been in the past. Okay? Is that... Yes. Very good question. The question was, how do you know when you find the right teacher, or what do you look for when you're looking for a teacher? Well, again, this would be somewhat dependent on different instruments and so forth. One, of course, I would say two important categories of consideration, and these would seem somewhat obvious, but just emphasizing them would be, of course, musical expertise. Is the teacher themselves capable? Are they able to play to an advanced level or to a sufficient level? Are their students skilled? A lot of times I encourage parents in an area to ask a teacher if they can go to one of their recitals or watch a tape of one of their recitals and see the level of the students that they're teaching and observe them. A very important concern, and I don't know if I would say this is more important, but maybe equally important, it's definitely very important, and that is, can the person teach as well as perform? There are a lot of wonderful performers out there that can play the socks off a violin or a piano. I mean, they're incredible, but they don't know how to teach. Communicating that to a young person, encouraging them, expressing the explanation of the technique in a way that is palatable and encouraging and understandable, that's a whole skill in and of itself. And again, what you want to look for is a person who can really be a moral encouragement to a student. We, with our studio, I encourage all of my teachers to have a real student-oriented approach, or an approach that is not just handing out teaching, one size fits all to every student, but actually involved in a student's life, understanding what that student's going through. What are their issues? What is the issue with that 13-year-old teenage boy who's sulking through their lessons and not practicing? Is it just that they have no skill, or is it that they're at school and some of the guys are making fun of them because they're playing the piano? You're not going to fix that problem until you understand what the student's going through. And a teacher that can do that and accomplish that is worth their weight in gold. Of course, you want the musical expertise with that as well, but the combination of those two things, I would say, are the two essential elements that I would look for in an instructor. Yes, we'll do the man first. Sure. The question is that there are some folks that say that it's a good thing to rotate teachers, to take from one teacher for a number of years, then switch to a different teacher and to get different approaches. It is true that different teachers have different ways of teaching, and that's a valid point. I would question a little bit that approach personally. Now, there are situations where you might have a teacher who even themselves says that we've gotten to a point where I feel like the student is getting close to my level. I'm not really comfortable teaching them. They're to an advanced level that I'm not comfortable with. And in cases like that, obviously, there's a need to try to find something else and to work with another teacher. And also perhaps areas where a specific level of expertise is owned by a teacher. For example, a teacher who teaches nothing but classical music, and you're looking for someone who can do some hymn playing along with it. When I was in high school, for a period of time, we couldn't find a good teacher that did both, so I took classical lessons from one teacher and hymn playing from another teacher. With our studio, we try to combine both with a teacher. There may be situations like that. The one thing that if you found a good teacher, there is more there than just a musical approach. There is a certain value and intangible strength to a student having a teacher that they've had all the way through, someone that they've grown up with and they've come through. I have a student now who's a senior in high school. I've taught him since he's 6 years old, okay? Literally, 11 years, 12 years, okay? And you know what? When I have to really get on to him about something, there's a relationship there, okay? There is a bond that is strong, almost, I wouldn't say like a parent's bond, but, I was telling someone the other day that private teaching is really a unique thing. Even a teacher in a classroom setting has students for 1 year and then they're gone. I mean, you see these kids every week. You spend a half hour one-on-one with them for almost their whole life. And that enables a good teacher, and again, emphasis on that, someone who's really skilled, to really work with that student in an efficient way and to build off of that foundation of trust and relationship that can make progress. So I would say in answer to your question that I don't think that necessarily that's a disadvantage, and my personal advice, although some might disagree, would be if you've got a good teacher, if you have found someone who you really appreciate, that I would say that, in my opinion, the strengths of keeping that same teacher outbalance the negatives. One thing I would say is that every good teacher would encourage students to do master classes and brief study with other teachers, and that's something that can, again, build technique, so not that they can't ever sit under someone else. As far as just playing musical teachers with music teachers, that can be perhaps a negative thing. There was another question back here. Okay, sorry, just caught the last word. The question was that there is a 9-year-old daughter who's taken piano for 3 years, was that correct? And she's considering changing to another instrument. Oh. Well, I don't know if I want to get into this or not. Is his wife present in the audience today? Yes. Well, these are tough decisions, and it's kind of, again, it's hard to give a one-size-fits-all answer for something like that. The questions I would ask are, what are the reasons for the change? Is this something that is motivated or based on perhaps the student's abilities being more tailored toward another instrument? Are they struggling with, piano? The one thing that's true with piano that I will say, and again, a good instrument teacher will tell you this, is that it's highly foundational for other instruments. It's something that really builds a theory and a harmony foundation for instruments like violin and trumpet and those kind of things. So I've had parents that told their kids, you're studying piano for 3 years, and then if you want to take something else, you can. And there's situations like that. I think it's a wonderful thing if it's possible for a student to maintain 2 instruments if they're mature enough to do so, if they can handle 2 practice times, perhaps piano and another instrument. The nice thing about piano, the one big consideration is not just that it's foundational, but also it is probably the most relevant instrument in worship today. It's something that keyboards and pianos that are the central musical instrument in any church, and something that is a huge need in churches. And so I really feel like that with any student, even one that doesn't feel good at piano, that building that skill is something that can only help them in the future. We have time for one more quick question. Yes. Yeah, this is the question was that she has a 9-year-old or a 14-year-old who's been taking violin for 9 years, wants to rush through pieces. This is something that happens with a lot of students at that age, and it's, I think, part of a growing up process. Again, what I would just encourage is patient encouragement with this, and the teacher can help you with this. Teachers don't like that any more than parents do. Encourage them. Listen to recordings. something that's really helpful with this is have them record themselves and listen back to it. And listen to how bad that sounds. Man, that's me. Didn't sound that bad when I was playing it, okay? And even I'll have students sometimes take a colored pencil and put check marks in their music of every mistake that they make, and they get done, and then I have them tally them up, and they go, 16? Oh, wow. That's how when your mistake number is higher than your age, you've got a problem. And that really helps them to quantify their sloppiness and to realize that I can do better than this. I've got to take some time and be more careful. We're going to have to finish up here. I would just invite all of you to, hold on one second, are you getting all this? Sorry, we don't have time for these slides. I was just going to show you real quickly. See all the stuff that we could have talked about? You sure you guys don't want to stay another hour? We've got some time here. Okay, doing all to the glory of God. This is a map of where our booth is, and we'd love to speak with you, any of you who are interested. I have some catalogs down there of sacred music that are free. I just brought some up with me. We're not selling anything out of them, but you'd be welcome to take them home. It's for a publishing company that I trust. If you're here in the hall, if you go out into the lobby and then go straight down the lobby, our booth is at the very end and on the corner. And again, if we can help anyone with a teacher who's having trouble finding one, we try to do a very serious job with our music, but one that's encouraging and to the glory of God. Thank you all for coming. It's been good to speak with you.